At my wedding, when I refused to give my parents $75.0 so, they yelled and said they would ruin my marriage. My cruel dad, enraged, slapped me hard, and I staggered and fell. Then my mother picked up a heavy metal flower stand and hit me on the head with such force that I was severely injured. I was crying in pain. They were laughing sarcastically. Suddenly, my fiancée took such a powerful action that my parents trembled in fear. My name is Emma, and I'm 26 years old. From the outside, my childhood looked picture perfect. We lived in a beautiful 2-story home in an upscale suburban neighborhood. My father, Richard, was a successful executive at a major engineering firm. My mother, Susan, stayed home to keep everything spotless and organized. My younger brother, Ethan, and I went to the best private school in town, wore the nicest clothes, and had everything money could buy. But what we didn't have was love, at least. I didn't. When Ethan was born, something shifted. My parents became obsessed with him, his smile, his first steps, his every little milestone. As he grew older, their attention only intensified. By the time he turned 6 and started playing football, it was like I'd vanished from their world entirely. Dad proudly called him our future NFL star. He'd say it in grocery stores, at dinner parties, to the mailman, anyone who would listen. Meanwhile, I'd be sitting in the same room, clutching an award certificate or a glowing report card, hoping for even the smallest acknowledgement. It never came, while Ethan got private coaches, expensive cleats, and endless praise. I quietly wore second-hand clothes and paid for my own school supplies with babysitting money. I didn't hate him. Ethan was a good kid, maybe a little spoiled, but it wasn't his fault. He didn't ask to be the center of their universe. Still, it hurt. I learned early on that the best way to survive was to stay quiet, to blend into the background, and to build something of my own. So I did. I worked hard in school, studied late into the night, and earned a scholarship to study interior design at a prestigious college out of state. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe no more being second place, no more living in the shadows. College gave me space to find myself. I met people who actually asked how I was doing. I created art, designed beautiful spaces, and finally felt seen. But no matter how far I ran, the patterns from home found ways to follow me. The phone calls, when they came, were always about Ethan, his football tournaments, his sprained ankle, his college recruiters. My parents only called me when it was convenient or when they wanted to brag about Ethan's latest game-winning touchdown. Even so, I kept moving forward. I didn't know it yet, but the day I met Liam, everything would change. It happened at a housewarming party for one of my interior design clients. I had just finished styling the space, a soft blend of minimalist whites and forest greens, and was watching guests admire the custom bookshelf I'd designed when someone bumped into me. A sharp gasp escaped my lips as a full glass of red wine splashed across the crisp white rug beneath us. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," the guy stammered, eyes wide, holding the empty glass like a crime scene weapon. I knelt quickly, dabbing the spill with a cloth, and tried not to laugh. "Well, at least it's not my couch," I said. He chuckled, running a hand through his dark, slightly messy hair. "I'm Liam, by the way, and clearly a disaster at parties." We ended up talking the rest of the night, not the shallow, what do you do small talk, but real conversation. He asked about my designs, my goals, even my favorite childhood memories. It was disarming how genuinely he listened, as if I were the only person in the room. Within months, we were inseparable. By our 1-year anniversary, we'd moved in together, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I didn't have to fight for attention. With Liam, I didn't have to earn love. I was just loved. Freely, fully, quietly. Then came my 20th birthday. He took me out to a cozy rooftop restaurant. We shared dessert under the stars, talked about how far we'd come. And then, just as I was reaching for the last bite of cheesecake, he stood up, walked around the table, and dropped to one knee. My heart froze. "Emma," he said softly, pulling a velvet box from his coat pocket. "I've loved you from the moment you told me that rug was hopeless. I want to build a home with you. Will you marry me?" Tears welled up in my eyes. "Yes," I whispered. That night, I lay in bed beside him, staring at the ring glinting on my finger. and wondering how in the world I was going to tell my parents. Surprisingly, when I called them, they sounded thrilled. "Oh, Emma, that's wonderful," Mom said with genuine excitement. "We can't wait to meet Liam. Bring him over this weekend." I was stunned. It felt like maybe they were ready to turn a new page, that maybe this wedding could be our bridge to something better. Liam and I drove to my parents' house that Saturday, for once. It wasn't about Ethan. They welcomed Liam warmly, complimented his manners, and asked questions. We sat around the dinner table, laughing about childhood stories. It felt surreal. Then, just as the evening was wrapping up, Dad swirled his wine and said, "So, has Emma told you about Ethan, our football star?" Liam smiled politely. "She's mentioned him." And just like that, the shift happened. My parents launched into a full-on TED talk about Ethan's future, his college prospects, NFL dreams, some sports agent they'd met. I sat there, silent, watching the spotlight drift away from me once again. Liam squeezed my hand under the table. Still, I tried not to let it dampen my spirit, especially when, a few days later, Dad called and said something I never expected. "We've decided to contribute $75 toward your wedding. We want to do this for you." I was floored. They'd never invested in me like this, not for school, not for graduation, not for anything. Mom got deeply involved, attending dress fittings, cake tastings, and sending me color palettes at midnight. Dad reviewed vendor contracts like they were corporate takeovers. They treated my wedding like a high-stakes mission, and for the first time, I let myself believe maybe they did care, maybe they were finally trying. But I should have known that kind of love from them always came with strings. The first few months of wedding planning felt like a dream. Mom met me for coffee nearly every weekend to talk floral arrangements and menu options. She even teared up when I tried on my dress for the first time. Dad treated our seating chart like a tactical battle plan, sketching options and adjusting guest clusters like chess pieces. I allowed myself to believe this was real, that I wasn't just an afterthought anymore. But slowly, inevitably, Ethan crept back in. It started subtly. We were on our way to meet the florist when Mom's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and lit up. "It's about Ethan's tryout schedule," she said, waving it off. "I'll just be a minute." The minute turned into 20. Our meeting was rushed, her attention scattered. Then the venue walkthrough was postponed. Ethan had a meeting with a potential scout, and they needed to be there for moral support. I tried to shrug it off, but every time I tried to move forward with the wedding, Ethan's football dreams came knocking. It became a pattern. I'd get excited about a planning milestone, and my parents would suddenly become unavailable. I remember crying to Liam one night while we were finalizing the guest list. They're spending thousands on Ethan's hotel bookings and flights for tryouts. I sobbed, but they can't make time for a cake tasting. He held me tightly. "At least they're helping with the cost." "Right," he whispered. "That's something." He meant well, but it didn't make the ache disappear. I kept telling myself I was being unreasonable, that Ethan needed their help more, that I had Liam, and that should be enough. But somewhere deep inside, the same old wound reopened. I was still the backup plan, still second. And then came the rehearsal dinner week. We were just a few days away from the wedding when my phone rang. It was Mom. I smiled, assuming she was calling to confirm dinner plans. "Hi, Mom. I was just about to call you about tomorrow, Emma," she interrupted, her voice low and tense. "We need to talk." My stomach turned. She paused, then said, "Your father has an urgent business trip. We're going to have to reschedule the rehearsal dinner, and we may need to delay the wedding too." I blinked, stunned. "What? No, Mom, the wedding is this weekend. Everything is booked. The guests are flying in. We can't just cancel." "You'll understand when you're older," she replied flatly. "Sometimes life happens." I hung up, my hands shaking. I sat in silence for a while, my heart pounding in my chest. Something didn't feel right. The story didn't add up. Later that evening, while scrolling social media in a haze, I saw it. Ethan had posted a photo with his duffel bag, standing at the airport, Eastern Europe. Here I come. Big tryouts. Couldn't have done it without Mom and Dad. My blood ran cold. There was no business trip. They were flying across the world with Ethan on the week of my wedding. They lied to me again. I dialed Ethan. My hands trembling with rage. He answered cheerfully. Hey, sis, what's up? You're leaving this Saturday? I asked, my voice tight. Yeah, he said. Tryouts start Thursday, and we want to get settled. Why? I closed my eyes. Saturday is my wedding. Ethan. There was a pause. Then he chuckled. Oh, yeah. Forgot about that. You can always reschedule. Right. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for me. My chest tightened. You seriously think your tryout is more important than my wedding? Ethan sighed. Look, I'm sorry, but this is my career. You have your life with Liam now. I've got to chase my dream. The call ended, but my rage didn't. They were choosing him again. The morning of my wedding was supposed to be beautiful, and, in many ways, it was. The sun rose in soft gold over the horizon. The venue was blooming with white orchids and soft blush roses. Just like I dreamed, my bridesmaids fluttered around me, adjusting curls, dabbing at eyeliner. And Liam, he looked at me like I was the only person in the world. I tried to let it all in, to focus on the man I loved, the life we were about to build. I had already made peace with the fact that my parents weren't coming. They had made their choice. But I wasn't prepared for what came next. The reception was in full swing. Guests laughed over champagne. The band played something light and jazzy in the background. Liam and I had just finished our first dance and were walking back toward our seats when the doors burst open. Gasps rippled through the room. There, standing at the entrance in their finest clothes but with the coldest expressions, were Richard and Susan. My heart stopped. Liam's hand tightened around mine. What the hell are they doing here? He whispered. I didn't have time to answer. They stormed toward us. Conversations dying around the room, all eyes turning. My father's voice boomed across the hall. Stop this farce right now. I froze. Dad, what are you doing? We're here to end this mistake before it goes any further. He barked. My mother stepped forward, her arms crossed tightly. You still have time to walk away from this. Emma, my jaw clenched. This is my wedding. You weren't even going to come, and yet we're the ones who paid for it. Richard interrupted coldly. $75.0 so. That's what this entire thing cost. And now you won't even listen to your parents. Liam stepped forward. You gave that money because you said you cared, not to control her. Richard ignored him. You cancel this wedding right now, or you pay us back every single dollar today. I stared at them in disbelief. That money was never a loan. It was a gift for your daughter's wedding. Susan's voice sharpened. You think you're entitled to that money after the way you've disrespected us. I took a breath, feeling the anger rise in my throat. No, I think I'm entitled to one day that isn't about Ethan. One day that's about me, and I'm not canceling anything. That's when it happened. Richard's hand flew out and struck me across the face. Hard. The room gasped. I stumbled back, clutching my cheek, barely keeping my balance. Before anyone could react, Susan, red-faced with rage, grabbed the tall floral stand from beside the stage. Susan, don't. Someone shouted, but it was too late. She swung it with both hands and smashed it against the side of my head. A blinding pain exploded through my skull. I hit the ground hard. The sound of screams echoing in my ears. I saw blurred faces rushing toward me. Someone cried out for help. Liam dropped to his knees beside me, cradling my head. You monsters, he spat at my parents. You hit her. You just assaulted my wife. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and called 911. I need police and paramedics, he told the operator, voice cracking with emotion. Right now. My wife has been attacked at our wedding by her parents. People were shouting. Guests were crying. Some had backed away in shock. Others were already filming. Within minutes, flashing red and blue lights bathed the reception hall. Police officers stormed in with paramedics. Richard and Susan were immediately restrained. The officers took witness statements while the EMTs tended to my head. As they loaded me onto the stretcher, Liam leaned in close. You're going to be okay. I'm right here. Through the haze of pain and tears, I gripped his hand, and in that moment, I wasn't the girl they could silence anymore. The hospital room was quiet, dim, and cold. I lay there with an IV in my arm and a bandage wrapped tightly around my head. The painkillers dulled the throbbing, but nothing could numb the ache in my chest. Liam sat beside me, holding my hand like he was afraid I'd float away. I could still hear the echo of my mother's voice demanding money, the crack of the floral stand, slamming into my skull. The way my father had slapped me in front of 100 people all at my wedding. I kept thinking back to how I'd spent years craving their attention, their approval. And when I finally had their support or so, I thought they used it as leverage. Their generosity was a weapon. Their love had always been conditional. Not anymore. I turned to Liam. "I'm going to press charges." He blinked, surprised, then nodded slowly. "I'll stand beside you every step of the way." "I'm not just doing this for me," I said. "I'm doing it so they never hurt me or anyone else again." When I was discharged 2 days later, I walked out of that hospital with a stitched wound and a steel heart. Within a week, with the help of an attorney, I filed a formal police report. We submitted medical documentation of the head injury, wedding footage from guests' phones, eyewitness accounts from over a dozen people, and a signed affidavit from the paramedics who treated me on site. The district attorney took the case seriously. My parents were charged with assault, attempted coercion, and use of financial leverage in an abusive manner, because the incident occurred at a public event with dozens of witnesses and physical evidence. The case moved swiftly. Their lawyer tried to argue that they were emotionally overwhelmed and trying to protect their daughter, but no jury bought it, not after the footage was played in court. The slap, the stand, the blood, and then came the final blow. Ethan took the stand. My brother, their golden boy, the one they had always protected, always preferred, sat before the court and said, clearly and calmly, "My parents have never been able to love us equally. I see that now. I didn't want to. But they crossed a line that can't be undone." He looked over at them, at our mother, who was pale and trembling, and our father, who stared straight ahead like a stone. "I'm done protecting them. They don't deserve it." Gasps rippled across the courtroom, and just like that, they lost everything. The judge delivered the sentence: 5 years in state prison for Richard and Susan, with no parole for the first 2 years, a restraining order barring them from contacting me or Liam ever again, and a ruling that their $75.0 gift was non-refundable, as it had been voluntarily given for the purpose of a wedding. I walked out of that courtroom with my head held high, not because I'd won, but because I had finally broken free. After the trial, everything felt still. There were no more angry voicemails, no sudden messages asking for favors, no passive-aggressive comments about Ethan's next game, just silence. And it was the most peaceful sound I'd ever known. Liam and I returned to our apartment, which now felt more like home than anywhere I had ever lived. The bruises on my skin faded slowly, but the weight that had lived in my chest for years, that constant pressure to prove myself, to be enough, was finally gone. We made a quiet decision together. We would repay the $75.0, not because we were legally obligated, but because we wanted zero ties to the people who had tried to destroy our wedding day. We took out a loan and transferred every cent. It was a sacrifice, but one that bought us complete freedom. Weeks turned into months. I threw myself back into work, designing beautiful spaces for clients who appreciated my talent. Liam's career was also thriving, and our love stronger than ever. We traveled, took walks without checking our phones for dramatic texts, and laughed over little things, like how our wedding reception ended up on local news for all the wrong reasons. We joked about someday renewing our vows with no uninvited guests and definitely no floral stands. And then, one crisp fall afternoon, everything changed again. I was organizing samples in my studio when I felt dizzy and had to sit down. A test later that evening confirmed what I already suspected. I was pregnant. When I told Liam, he laughed, cried, and hugged me for so long I thought he might never let go. We stood in the nursery months later, soft creams and gentle blues, a mobile spinning slowly above the crib, and I realized something profound. I had broken the cycle. I wasn't going to be the kind of parent who made her child fight for love. I wasn't going to pour everything into one child and forget the other. I was going to create a home filled with kindness, with patience, with balance. I would teach my child that their voice matters, that love isn't earned, it's given freely, that respect doesn't come from fear, but from being truly seen. One evening, Liam and I stood together, arms around each other, looking at the ultrasound photo taped to the fridge. "This," I whispered, "is the family I always dreamed of." And I meant it not because it was perfect, but because it was mine, built not from money or appearances, but from truth, love, and the courage to finally choose myself. Months passed, and life flowed in its beautiful rhythm. Inside me, A new life was growing, one that was free of fear, full of love, and entirely our own. Liam would hold my hand during every ultrasound, stayed up late, reading baby books, and put together the crib himself. Every day, he reassured me that our child would be born into a world where he would never be overlooked. Then the day came. The hospital room was filled with bright light. Waves of pain coursed through my body, but my heart was at peace. Liam was with me, breathing in sync with mine, holding my hand tightly. And then, the sound of a cry filled the room. A nurse placed a tiny, round, little being on my chest, eyes still closed, but his hands gripping my finger tightly. "Welcome to the world, my little boy," I whispered. We named him Noah. Noah's eyes held the kind of light I had always longed for, innocent, unconditional love. He was a new beginning, the first light of a family that Liam and I had built, one founded on equality, respect, and sincerity. Later that night, as Liam and I sat beside him, I kissed his forehead and said, "Noah, you'll never have to fight for love. You already have it, unconditionally."